those funds are awarded.
Continue.
Okay, I guess we're now recording earlier. After that phase, those projects that were awarded planning funds can then submit applications for implementation funds during that 5-year period. So that by the end of the period of the IHO funding bill, they anticipate allocating the rest of the remaining $8 billion for projects that they anticipate would take anywhere from 6 to 12 months to complete, is kind of how that fund process will work. In terms of the state of California, starting in March of this year, the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, in partnership with the UC system, started having a variety of conversations to bring together state agencies, local government agencies, regional agencies, utilities, public transportation, freight, the university systems, a whole bunch of different public and private partners that potentially could be a part of California's application for a hydrogen hub. The governor's approach is to have one application for the entire state of California. And that is what in August created the ARCHES, the Alliance for Renewable Clean Hydrogen Energy Systems. So that is being led by GoBiz and then the UC system to help just manage the oversight of that. And they will be the one responsible for submitting California's application. What's significant for us in that respect is that ARCHES is the only entity recognized by the governor to submit an application, which means that's the only entity that any projects included in the ARCHES application is eligible for state matching funds. Under the Department of Energy's program, it requires a 50% match for any requested funds. So the state has said they're going to use ARCHES as that mechanism to show their commitment from state and private funds, because part of it will include investments by private and other entities to help make projects possible. The goal of the ARCHES is to address a few items related to hydrogen, including the production, the processing, the delivery of those systems, as well as workforce development in end-use cases. They're looking at opportunities in terms of ports, public transportation, freight, possibly even light-duty vehicles as various options. Those projects have not been picked. ARCHES has just really been identified in August. They're setting up the mechanisms in place for a variety of entities, local, state, private, nonprofit, tribes even, to submit ideas for projects for selection through the process. That is getting in preparation for the Department of Energy's notice for the funding opportunity, which is anticipated sometime later this fall. Could be as late as December. They're already behind schedule in issuing that out. Our involvement since then has been to provide a regional perspective on that process as a smaller agency. Also being a voice for the North State Super Region in Northern California area in terms of, hey, don't forget Northern California. If we look at the 16 county North State area, that's land area. It's 1/3 of the state of California, over 1 million people in an area. And if the state is really serious about having hydrogen hubs and connecting the West Coast to Oregon and Washington, we're kind of that gap to get that direction and stuff. So our involvement has been providing info on the process, being kind of to understand where they're headed and disseminate information to all of our regional partners. That has been our involvement to date so far. However, with now the development of ARCHES, that discussion is going to narrow down. So to be able to continue to be kind of essentially in the know in the process with the state, to be able to submit projects and have those conversations of being partnered with fuel cell providers and or utilities and other partners that would help make projects possible or finding groups of projects. You have to be a part of the ARCHES and kind of sign this memorandum of commitment that they have labeled there. So that is what the staff report there is recommending that we do. We did go to the Fiscal and Policy Committee to discuss this. As it mentioned in the staff report, that they concurred with the staff's recommendation. In terms of commitment for now at this point, all it is staying part of the conversation. There's no fiscal responsibility at this point. We haven't even had a chance to have a full, honest conversation about project ideas. And those could be anything. So we're talking with the city, the county, Reading Electric Utility, Shasta County Economic Development Corporation on, hey, is there any opportunity where we could throw some concepts up the chain through that if we are part of that process? We see this as opportunity as well to potentially have state and federal funds come to the region to support this effort. We also feel it's important to be aware of where the state's headed on this effort with the Advanced Clean Cars ruling and other elements of a zero emission transportation system in the future, whether that's 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, whatever that takes. So we can properly plan and work with our partners in the region to understand what that impact's going to be. In terms of the language on the document, commitment, correspondence, it was something we didn't realize till the end. They and all their documentation and emails said it was a memorandum of correspondence. Then the attachment said as commitment, or yeah, sorry, memorandum of cooperation. Then their final one that we had received said commitment. So if you wanted, you can modify the recommendation if the board choose to continue to say sign the memorandum of commitment with any issue there.
Well, it's easy to cooperate with somebody. It might be difficult to commit.
I just Googled it and currently on their website, the title of it is Memorandum of Cooperation.
Yeah,
Yeah, we should then.
Okay.
correct, yeah. They were kind of back and forth and we're like, hey, what's going
I
on?
just Googled it and that's what it is.
Yeah.
Okay, Mark, you got it.
Good.
In terms of applying for funds. Yes, in theory, the agency with a variety of other partners could send it to try to submit a hydrogen hub application for funding. Given the fact that the federal government says they're looking at the end of Fund 4 or 6, it's probably unlikely we would be competitive enough unless we had large enough partners that had some good concept to go with that. The other challenge is that the 50% match requirement. If we go on our own, we have no opportunity and we will not receive support from the state of California for state funds for whether it's from the Transportation Commission, the Utility Commission, the Energy Commission or others. So we would all be on our own to figure out that 50% match between local funds, any projects we already have awarded between partners and private investment. So that would be the challenge there if we were to not be a part of ARCHES, at least as terms of the conversation. There's no guarantee that any project ideas we come up with for the concept will be accepted in their final concept paper. And if that were the case, then our conversation involvement would probably disappear at that point, even after signing a memorandum of commitment. Because if we have no projects, there's no sense to continue as part of the process. And your question related to, going the way of electric bus when we talk about hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, right? So yes, we have seen so far that RABA's experience with the Proterra electric bus has been less than ideal in this situation from what we had hoped would be available. Since then, we are talking about the procurement of that vehicle was, application was in 2017. There was limitation in terms of the vendors that were available that were doing stuff. New California was headed in this direction with public transit going zero emission. So it was a chance to acquire primarily federal and state funding to buy a vehicle to test, to get some infrastructure equipment at RABA and see. It's possible that any vendor with a product, you might run into poor performance, lack of support, or other issues, whether it's Proterra or anyone else, if they don't have good management in place. I will say, and I can say this because it's been made public at various conferences, that there's at least one other large transit provider that is retiring the Proterra vehicles that they've received early due to issues. So that gives you a sense of how that vendor has performed with various agencies across the state. It's true that when you talk about the hydrogen side, on certain vehicles, the technology is not as advanced there as others. However, it depends on what types of vehicles you're talking about. If you're talking about the low floor style buses that we have on fixed route services, the larger vehicles, a variety of agencies have been using those. For instance, Sunline Transit in Palm Springs has been doing hydrogen fuel cell buses for over 20 years. And there's other agencies that have been doing it for 12, 15, 18 years as well in the state of California. So low floor buses it's not a new concept, a new technology. There are a variety of vehicles available through different vendors for matching funds from the state under the Heavy Duty Infrastructure Match Program, or HVIP. When we talk about motor coaches, there is more limitation in terms of that side, but that applies to both battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Those are still being tested on both markets, still being put out there battery electric is just a little bit more ahead in terms of investment and where manufacturer at on those. But the state, through CalSTA, is supportive of advancing that effort because of the state's goals to work towards a zero emission transportation system, to work towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions and air pollutants across the board. And they're looking to lead the way in some of those efforts. So we're actually having a conversation next week with CalSTA about what exactly that looks like across the state, with them as lead on these efforts, as well as a variety of other transit and other local agencies involved in that process. So we'll have more learning, next week on that effort. That's kind of what I have for you there as for those.
A lot more than was in the staff report, so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Those were some questions that came up and some discussions that I had, and I think you've covered it. Anybody from the board?
Chair Mazzano, could I ask, I need a clarifying question. I've got some other things to say, but first off, if I heard you right, you said that there's other jurisdictions within the state of California that are using hydrogen low floor buses like our Gillig buses that we run all around our county, almost around our city, but some in our county that have been doing it, you said for 16 to 20 years?
They're from 12 to 18 years. Yeah. Sunline Transit is the primary one that most of us all know in the industry. They've been doing it for 20 plus years. They actually manufacture their own hydrogen for their vehicles. They have an electrolyzer, and they're working on also other pilot projects with the state for how to work towards renewable hydrogen. And they're kind of the primary public transit operator, the large one that everyone goes to say, how does stuff tested? When manufacturers want to do something, they go to them, and if Sunline says, no, go back to the drawing board, they go back to the drawing board.
So correct me if I'm wrong. I've been on SRTA now, or RABA, for 3.5 years, give or take. $8.6 million to build hydrogen-powered buses was allocated for the Salmon Runner primarily. I believe we also allocated $900,000 to administer that program.
As part of
Before the program was, we allocated $900,000. I'm struggling with the fact, if we have other jurisdictions who have been doing it for that long, that Sean, bless you for being in that chair. Thank you for your time day before yesterday. When we try to build a better mousetrap and others are doing it really well, it's ridiculously expensive for the taxpayer, I believe. Philosophically, I just think that we are not doing it well when we spend a lot of taxpayer dollars, because those are not federal dollars or state dollars. Those are taxpayer dollars. We pay it at the pump. We pay it in 100 other ways. In California, we have the highest cost to register a vehicle in the nation, right? So we're paying out of our pockets, all of us, for these programs. And when others are doing it really well, it seems like a tremendous waste of taxpayer dollar to me,
So,
to be honest with you.
yes.
Can you validate my assumption that we've allocated almost $10 million
Yeah. So,
a program that I'm not sure is ever going to ever be able to do it? Will we ever be able to do it?
let me give you some context there of where we're headed, right? So we do have, in the state of California, we have the Innovative Clean Transit Rule, which requires all large and small public transit agencies to move towards zero emission. So large agencies have already worked on their plans or done their plans. Small agencies such as RABA and SRTA, we'll be working on developing those and approving those by June 30th of next year to come up with an initial plan of what that transition will look like to move our fleets to zero emission. So you're correct in that those other agencies have been at the forefront of figuring out how things work. On a variety of efforts, primarily that's been on the low floor side for the funding and everything. What we have looked at was, as a regional agency, that there have been a variety of needs for requests for folks to being able to get down to a low cost, to be able to get down to the downtown Sacramento, so the state capital, to be able to connect to public passenger rail, so an Amtrak station, to have a better service model rather than trying to book a bus trip through a rail website that was complicated to do at all. We did have a service years ago that used to provide a service from downtown Reading to the Sacramento airport, but it was just that. It was, and you couldn't get it for other stuff. We've had community members, not just in Shasta County, but also across Tehama, Glenn, Colusa, Siskiyou, Modoc, talk about the needs to be able to have some way to get around to get the medical services at UC Davis and other places in the Sacramento region, or be able to connect to further transportation down there. So our goal there was to look and work with partners to say, okay, from that large of a regional perspective, is there an option that we could look at? Because passenger rail is not going to happen anytime soon. You know, the current service is at 2.
Unless you want to get on at 2 a.m.
Yeah, exactly.
You can get there.
And because other services have not worked, and Greyhound and other services are very sporadic as well, to try to find an opportunity. What we saw was the way to make that possibly an option is to look at some zero emission public transportation option of some type of express route from downtown Reading to downtown Sacramento with limited stops for in the other regions along I-5 and nearby that can have feeder services. So that's what we looked at for an opportunity, is the state funds that were set aside for those efforts to acquire. So the original funds we did get was to look at battery electric buses initially. That, once we went through the process and the Center for Transportation and Energy assisted us with a review of available equipment at the time, several years ago, determined that when you look at the life cycle of vehicles, those battery electric buses do not perform to the needs that we need for
Doesn't meet the requirement.
comparable service. So the discussion was, after that, in talking with the state agencies and others that are, you know, says, hey, what about hydrogen? And that was where the discussion started. So the state is looking to help lead and push the effort a little bit more, as well as allocating more funds for hydrogen infrastructure. So that's where the conversation is headed at this point, is to look for opportunities for that interregional service, to have something that we can have that benefits not just the Shasta region, but all of Northern California. So that's where our
Infrastructure stuff.
so the 8.6 was for vehicles. We would have to reallocate those in specified application from battery electric to hydrogen. We in partnership with the state to help lead that, so they'd have additional support to make that happen. As well as the state, we were in discussions with securing infrastructure funds for 1 or 2 hydrogen stations, as well as be able to purchase fuel for a significant amount of time. The benefit we see also there is we have talked in the past with Reading River Rabba about potential opportunities maybe to share facilities. So where maybe we might be able to have the salmon runner of vehicles once that service started on a portion of Rabba's land down the road, if that made sense and if it worked, but be able to share the fueling infrastructure. So there could be the opportunity, and there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of things we still need to explore.
They keep racking up in my mind while you speak, Sean.
Yeah, no, and we're continuing to learn through the conferences that we've been with the partners that have been looking at stuff. To see there's low cost options for possibly having a hydrogen station upwards of $3 million roughly. That is a much smaller unit. It doesn't require big tanks installed at sites. An opportunity there. So have lower cost. But where to benefit both the salmon runner service as well as for Rabba, if Rabba determines through their ICT rule plan that they may need to, based upon certain routes, look at hydrogen as an opportunity that they wouldn't have to necessarily do initial investment in the infrastructure. There might be savings for the region across the board. Lots of questions still, but that's what we're having.
I don't think it's a secret. I'm pretty against zero emission vehicles because I think it's going to be a huge cost that is not going to be efficient. I would also ask that in our planning that we would really take into account that you should eliminate your medical UC Davis patient because they're going to get on North Bay Transit, they're going to get in a Prius, and they're going to be driven from curb to curb, door to door, and back. They're not going to get on a bus and ride for 3 hours while we pick up everybody from Red Bluff and then Corning and, Yuba, or not Yuba City, but yeah, probably Yuba City. And it's just not going to happen because Medi-Cal is now paying for that travel. So eliminate 50%, 70% of your ridership. I just think it's important that we look at that thoroughly, because I'm not convinced we're gonna make that. I get it. It doesn't have to pencil. I understand. I'm learning after 3 years, highly subsidized program. On the other hand, it's still a lot of money. So the other thing I'd ask is just look at who's doing it well. Hydrogen has been around a long time. This is not a new technology. So to think that we need to, figure that stuff out, I think you go find the people who are doing it best and you invest in that. I'm not against, I love electric. I think it's the coolest technology out there. I don't think it's very cost effective for the taxpayer, but I think it's a great technology. I'm not against the technology. I just don't think that it's for today or even, whatever we forced by 2025, 28, whatever they got.
2029.
So, yeah, so, thank you for that. I'm a little concerned, when government gets, we're gonna be the sole applicant. I think it unfortunately will exclude a lot of private folks who have investment dollars and who do research really well. I'm a little concerned with that. I don't know if this is the right language, but it feels like you can create monopolies and the government is involved in that. I'm not saying that's what they're trying to accomplish, but oftentimes that's the end result, and everybody else is excluded and you're excluding. And it says, the last bullet point, and this is repeat for Sean, the undersigned organization shall not work on any other hydrogen hub proposal for the state of California or with any other entity developing an alternative hydrogen hub proposal for the state of California, including preparing alternative concept papers, websites, or other hydrogen hub proposal related materials. So that just speaks volumes to me that we're eliminating a whole lot of people out there who are really smart and who are probably in that space from being a part of the conversation. It's important to be a part of the conversation, and I thank you for your explanation, and that makes sense to me. We need to be in the conversation. I'm super thankful for that, but I'm a little concerned that we're not gonna play with the whole space.
So
Box there.
on that, I'll say that really only applies to the Hydrogen Hub federal application. We're free to do whatever we want in terms of projects. If we turn around and said, hey, we're gonna do workforce development, and someone comes into a business park in one of the cities and says, we're gonna do hydrogen manufacturing and everything else, we're not going for hydrogen hub funding. We can do whatever we want. We have the flexibility. So this commitment is only related to the Department of Energy's $8 billion hydrogen hub process and application. It does not apply. They can't have any say of anything else separate we do. We could be working on other projects and not submit them as consideration for the hydrogen hub application process. It just, if there are any that we do have that are projects the region submits and we're a part of it, then we would continue to work with Arches on those specific projects. Anything outside of it that wasn't part of it, we do whatever we want, with whoever we want within the confines of procurement laws and all that.
Got it. So if I read on the first page at the bottom, the list of bullet points, GoBiz and Arches under the state of California is going to manage and oversee, manage and coordinate all project participants, assist with managing all federal and state hydrogen hub project funding if awarded. I think this is an area that government does it really poorly, especially the state of California. I think if you looked at the High-Speed Rail Authority, that would be my primary complaint, I guess, on that particular bullet point. I think it's a mass transfer of wealth to a few, because we're not getting a high-speed rail built and we're spending, what are we at, 100 billion? Are we over 100 billion on that
Let's
project?
stay on this topic.
Can we, what,
No, but I'm making a point.
we're off the topic.
We are.
No, well,
Well, yeah.
possibly, except that the topic is whether we want,
We should hear from everybody else here.
okay,
What
but
was your last point?
just that I'm always a little cautious when the state is going to manage programs like this. That's my main thing. And I think it is on topic when we bring up the existing fact that they're not doing that one well. And I want to give it to them again. So
The other
my
thing,
concern.
Mike, is that, correct me if I'm wrong, we can join this and we can pull out if we want to.
Correct.
Okay.
There are 40 non-governmental non-governmental entities listed in the Arches website and it says in our document that it's a public-private
Right.
partnership. So I think they're leveraging the public, the private industry. And I think it's just saying we are not excluding ourselves from a possibility that may benefit a 16-county region in California.
And the fact that we could pull out if we don't like what's going on is
And we changed the language to say memorandum of
cooperation, which is different than a memorandum of commitment.
My last, Kristen, we tried to find that Arches website. I couldn't get it to pull up. Could you tell me what you typed in?
Just type in Arches CA and it came up. It's called Arches, ARCH.
2 days ago, we couldn't.
H2.org.
Okay, 2 days ago, I couldn't find it. I looked, and Sean and I looked, we couldn't pull it up,
You
so
might have had an issue with it.
is it a brand new website?
I don't know, I just pulled up.
Was trying to find out who's involved, who the private
I
is.
brought my iPad,
Good job.
Thank you, Kristen. It's good to know.
so,
Anybody else with comment on that? Greg?
Sean, you sent out an email saying that we received one public comment.
Correct.
And the public comment was, is this zombie technology? Is this California's hydrogen highway a road to nowhere? Now, I thought you said you were going to have a handout on that, but, and I pulled it up here on my phone. But do you have that whole packet and the information that you said you were going to add to this agenda item? A lot of information there on that email.
Yeah, so what we said there is we would include it as part of the record that a public comment, so we had not gotten there yet, was to say that we did receive one public comment. That email was provided, it was shared with all of the board of directors, and we entered into the record as part of it, as part of the minutes and everything, and what was provided.
Okay, so that's a very negative slant on the hydrogen being a road to nowhere.
Correct.
Okay, so my questions are, could we join this 6 months or a year from now? Is there any reason we need to do it now?
Yeah, so what we're looking at is the notice of funding opportunity from the Department of Energy is going to be this fall. So we roughly have somewhere between now and December or whenever that is. The sooner that we sign the memorandum of commitment that they have and start entering conversations, the sooner we can start considering project ideas, opportunities, if there's any ideas for the region to benefit, to propose, it's been up there, understand how the funding process may work as they have conversations. One challenge we will not have is until the federal NOFO comes out, we won't know what the exact guidelines are and the requirements. So then there will be.
Can you tell me how much money SRTA might be able to land from this program?
That is yet to be determined in terms of the process. So
Be a study grant to look at this, or would we be the lead here for the Reading area, or how would SRTA be involved in this?
So the way they've had enough workshops, I can say this. So in the conversations they've had, the whole state is the hydrogen hub. They're going to have roughly 3 clusters. They're going to have a Southern California cluster, they're going to have a Central California cluster, and a Northern California cluster of projects combined together. There could also be interaction through either as workforce development, producers, suppliers, shippers, between those clusters as well. That's what those planning funds help us it would help Arches if we are part of that. So what we may get to leverage is unknown at this time. It may mean that we might be able to secure companies such as Iwatani that does hydrogen manufacturing and stations and work with them, and they might provide matching funds with a station.
If they came to us a year from now, could we still join and then help them? Right now, we don't have anybody coming to us. Is that correct?
We have had a couple of vendors interested in potentially providing fuel, maybe a fueling station, but it's still too early to know. We're So in terms of who those are, I won't say right now in.
See, I kind of think that the whole hydrogen thing might be a highway to nowhere because of two major facts of how we get hydrogen. The only hydrogen producer we have right now is in West Sacramento, and they produce hydrogen from natural gas. So they're taking a fossil fuel and they're making hydrogen, and it doesn't qualify as green hydrogen. The second way to make hydrogen is to use electricity. And I looked into that, seeing if the city of Shasta Lake could provide the power, or REU provide the power to make hydrogen. And while there's abundant power from 10 till 3 in the afternoon, and they can ramp up and produce hydrogen at 100%, they have to run the hydrogen plant 24 hours a day, which means they're also at least running at 20% capacity from 5 to 9 p.m. when we don't have enough power. So I kind of think that what happened a couple of weeks ago when they're saying, hey, it's hot, would everybody just crank their thermostats up to 80 degrees because we don't have enough power, we're going to have rolling blackouts if you don't. And please do not charge any EVs at that time. And the other big thing that's happening that's not going to let anybody in the North State have a hydrogen plant is that they're talking about doing away with 13% of our electricity, which is produced by Diablo Canyon. If Diablo Canyon is supposed to go offline in 2025 or maybe 2030, and at that point, we're down 13% of our energy, and we would have had rolling blackouts last week. So I don't think we're going to have any hydrogen produced by electricity, which would be possibly green, but probably not. So I kind of think this is that if we could wait and see where this is going and hook on in a year from now, it might be good. And if we don't have anybody chomping at the door right now, why should we hop on this possibly dead horse?
So I have a question. So we go into queue on this. What's the downside for us being in queue? So let's just say they give us money and we decide for a variety of reasons that it's onerous and we don't want it. We can certainly not take it. It would seem to me, I agree with what Greg's saying. There's a lot of challenges here. But in my mind, let's just get in queue. We still reserve the right to say no. Should they bring us money? I struggle with anyone offering us money and saying no, but we still reserve the right to do that. And if we can't find the projects or we don't think it's appropriate, I would rather see us in line than not in line in my own mind.
Given the fact that we can pull out, I'm in favor.
Anytime we want.
I agree.
Not obligated by this.
The one aspect I would say there is, being in the queue, now you be part of the conversation for the high level initial concept paper and whatever that details that is. Again, that it will, the first application is a very high level concept paper. In the information we have received from the Department of Energy and the ARCHES folks have laid out. Getting that planning money, if it's awarded, would allow us to have further conversations to develop it. And that at that point, I'd say during that 12 to 18, maybe 24-month process, will then tell us, is there a real opportunity here or not? Or do we like, no, it's too challenging, too onerous. We can't get through certain permitting issues or something. And the region says, you know what, for your final implementation project, whatever that's defined, because part of that is to help refine those project ideas. Then at that point, I think you're still talking about pulling out. If we're like, hey, this doesn't work, it doesn't make sense for the area.
I agree. We get into the queue, and if we decide at some point down the road that it is the highway to nowhere, we pull out. It's pretty simple, I think.
I'm willing to make the motion that we adopt agenda item 4.5.
I would
5-4.
open it up to public comment.
Yes.
Yeah.
We will open this item up for public comment. Do we have anybody for public comment?
No one
Michael?
online.
No one online.
I
we'll
have none
close.
either. None.
I will close public comment.
Okay, now I can make,
You can make the motion.
that we change the language of the title of the document to align with what's currently on their website, which is memorandum of cooperation, even though the tab says memorandum of commitment on their website. The document says cooperation. And
Not a good start.
we're in the queue.
And I'll second that.
Okay.
We have a first and a second
Comments?
comment.
I still think that we should wait until we have somebody that wants to get on board with us. And kind of, I see no advantage to us today to signing on to this. I think you make a good point, Joe, but we don't have anybody chomping at the bit. So I'm going to vote no on this at this time.
Okay.
Noted.
Will we be taking a roll call
Yes,
vote?
yes,
Yes.
yes. And now we'll call for the roll call.
Okay, let's go down the line with board, or let's go with acting chair Mazzano,
Yes.
board member Commenti,
Yes.
board member Rickert,
Yes?
board member Jones,
No.
board member Gallagher,
Nope.
board member Schrader,
Yes?
board member Watkins.
No.
Thank you, everyone.
Motion carries 4-3.
All right.
On to item 6. Executive Director's Report.
Yeah, I will just, three quick items for my report this time. As you know, we continue to work with the Caltrans District 2 staff, as well as our regional partners on working on getting funding for that gap on Interstate 5 and the fixed, we call the Fixed 5 Cascade Gateway project. Previously at one of the last board meetings, we mentioned that we had submitted a application for a federal RAISE grant, with Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity program that was available for federal highway projects. We submitted a request for 25 million. We received an announcement in August that we were not awarded any funds from that program this cycle. We are waiting to hear back from them on an opportunity to debrief on the application so we can learn a bit more from the federal agencies that reviewed and their staff to get a better sense of how we could submit potentially for a future application if we're still in need of pursuing additional federal funds for that project. Additionally, earlier this year, we submitted a request through Doug Lamalfa's office and also through Senator Feinstein's office to try to request some funds, federal funds from Congress's Community Project Funding Program. Essentially, it's like an earmark program that they have for various projects. We submitted a request for up to trying to ask for $10 million funds. That was the max that you could ask for any type of a project under the transportation, housing, and urban development category. From the final notice that we got through both Lamalfa and Feinstein's offices is they got in there $3 million for consideration under the program. However, it is dependent upon final approval for next federal fiscal year's appropriations and budget for Congress. So we still have some time before we determine and find out whether or not we even got the $3 million that we just a process for consideration. So should anything happen with that, we'll let you know in a future update. And then we also continue to work with Caltrans District 2 to submit a Cycle 3 J Corridors Enhancement Program or TSIP application for both competitive funds that are available to Caltrans specifically, and then also to SRTA as a regional agency. So we are working with them on drafting that application, and we'll have some updates in the future in October and or December on that project. As you might be aware, we talked about it a little bit, but in August, the Air Resources Board and did approve the Advanced Clean Cars ruling, which has the aim to have all new light-duty passenger truck and SUV new sales be zero emission starting in year 2035. We are working with city, county, Caltrans, utility districts to understand the impact of that ruling in terms of local government fleets requirements. And what does that mean in terms of utility districts and electrical output? And then also, how can we assist on the regional planning side to potentially have projects listed in the RTP in the future for funding programs through the alphabet of agencies now that we have to track for transportation funding that we have going available. So, and we're also working with some of our smaller MPOs across the state to be able to have a common voice that challenges issues and constraints in dealing with that in our regional planning and the implementation of that effort. One other program I want to just briefly mention to you, because we did do an announcement today on it, is what's called the Regional Early Action Program Funds. These are state funds passed specifically under Newsom's budget in the last couple of years. The current program is called REAP 2.0. It's a flexible program that seeks to accelerate progress towards state housing goals while also looking to accelerate infill housing development, reduce vehicle miles traveled, increase housing supply at all affordability levels, and also to facilitate increased public transit use between all of those goals together with those projects. It's also meant to help facilitate the implementation of the sustainable community strategies in our regional transportation plan. So we have very strategic growth areas in each of our local cities and county for potential and future state investment. Under the REAP program, that money is being provided specifically to metropolitan planning organizations this round. Under that program, $2.24 million has been made available for the entire Shasta region, and SRTA gets the honor of having to manage and oversee that program. We received program guidelines late this summer. A couple of my staff are working on developing that. We actually have a webinar next week where we are asking anyone in the community, whether it's local housing, public works planning, transit agencies, tribes, nonprofits, developers that do housing projects, anyone interested in those avenues for input in the process as we identify how to create a regional application and call for projects, and then figure out a selection process that we have to go through. That program is being administered by the State Housing and Community Development Department. We'll be providing some items for you at the October and December board meetings as applications to request that 2.4 million for our region are due December 31st of this year. So there'll be more on that program as well over the next couple of board meetings with some action items from this board. And that concludes my director's report for today.
Questions? Very good, thank you. Item number 8.
Seven.
Gotta go 7, I'm sorry. I want to get to 8. 7, SRTA board members report on attendance and conference. Anybody traveling, attending anything? Great. Now we'll move to 8, and that is Kamiko presenting. Kamiko Taguchi?
I go by Kimmy.
Kimmy.
Works fine. Thank you.
Make a note of that.
All right. So as the Metropolitan Planning Organization, every 2 years, SRTA must prepare, staff must prepare something called the Federal Transportation Improvement Program, or called FTIP. And the reason why we do this is that we can ensure that there is consistency of anticipated revenues and provide an opportunity for public comment. This public comment period ends September 28th, and then we will have to submit this document to Caltrans at the end of the month on September 30th. This document is for federal fiscal years 2023 to 2026. And in this document, the amount of programs funded, is $318 million, $18 million in local funds, 282 in state funds, 282 million in state funds, and 17 million in federal funds. It's really important to note that SRTA has limited discretion to change FTIP project selections and priorities, as most are identified by the delivering agencies. Some projects that may be or can be noted are some active transportation program projects that the board may be familiar with. That is the Victor project and the Cattle project, which go into the total program funds for this document. Some other regionally significant projects that can be noted here is some transit projects, including RABA's projects involving federal operating and capital vehicle projects. Any questions on this item?
Questions?
I don't have any, I'll make a motion that we
Motion to approve.
approve, we need to gavel for the public hearing.
This is a public hearing.
Public hearing. Yeah. The gavel.
Public hearing is open. Do you have anybody?
No comments online.
Nobody in the lobby?
None.
Closed.
Hey, Chair, I did have one question. It was a fairly large document, I believe. Bless you for, when I was looking at the RABA amount, the bus replacement, I think there was 1.7 million. I don't really have a question, more of a comment. Again, I know I beat this drum on a regular basis, but I'm gonna keep beating it. You know, when we look at the cost of a regular gas or diesel fueled bus at 400,000 roughly, probably 500,000 now, and 1.6 million on an electric bus, that will require purchasing 2 of them to replace one diesel powered bus because they don't last all day. Our increase in cost to the taxpayer is 4 times. And I know you don't have anything to do with that. I'm just making a public comment that I think it's important that our public, if anybody's listening, understands that when we talk about zero emission and bus replacement funds, this is what we're actually looking at. It is a huge dollar amount to replace the whole fleet. So that's my comment. But thank you for the report. It was very thorough, very well done.
Well, I'll add to my comment. I think that for a federally and state funded agency like RABA to not adhere to state and federal guidelines on purchasing buses in a timely manner that meet the requirements, there's a danger of us losing future funding. So it's, I mean, it's like, you may not agree with the philosophy and how it's operated, but I think that bus has left the station because we're in an age where we're going to have to meet certain requirements. And I know we're trying to figure out what's the best way financially to meet it, but we also can't represent to our constituents that we could be in a position of not getting future money to do what we need to do for our transit. So I just want to put that out there that we may have philosophical differences, but I think we don't have that vote in the Capitol to make a change.
Well, I concur with your assessment and I agree. Until we can come up with a diesel bus that's zero emissions.
I don't think Greg agrees that we can do that, so.
Yeah. And I don't see that. And I agree that if we don't play by the rules, we stand to lose a substantial amount of money. And therefore, your comment is noted, Mike. But we do have a motion to approve.
And I'll second it.
And a second, and we'll do a roll call vote.
Under discussion still. Sean, so for a lot of this money, it's our gas tax and sales tax that in some of these areas on, when we're talking about the Federal Transportation Improvement Program, exactly what pot of money is that coming from?
So this is coming from all of the federal fund sources that we have. So a lot of the.
Federal gas tax?
So it's federal gas tax, correct. So it's federal gas tax, it comes back to the region. Most of the projects, SRTA is essentially the gatekeeper of keeping track of the information. And that's why we have this. This is how much of the federal gas tax is coming back to the region. A lot of that is assigned then to projects by formula for the jurisdictions. They identify those projects and we then working with them, make sure those projects are included for the region and then as part of the state process to show this is where we're spending that money.
So of this pot of money, you know, on the picture, you show bridges and various things, and you also show public transportation. Do we get to pick public transportation or not, or could that gas tax go towards other things?
So to the Transportation Development Act process and identify with the state funds and everything. We then work with RABA, and RABA identifies their needs based upon the amounts of Federal Transit Administration funding that they receive for the region. And RABA puts together the budget and then identifies what those fund sources are and where they get used. A lot of those fund sources are specifically transit-only funds. So they are not funds that we can just divert to any other type of a project. So we, as a region, try to make sure we always maximize using the transit-only funds first before we use our TDA dollars, which do have more flexibility.
And so under this federal transportation improvement program, are the funds for RABA specifically and only towards public transportation, or are we using other funds?
The funds on this document are related to those projects funded with the the federal transit-only funds.
Because Mr. Gallagher brings up some good points. I've had my concerns with RABA for a long time, just being so heavily subsidized that to the point that you might as well call it free transportation at this point. I mean, it's pennies on the dollar that we're getting back, and so I have huge concerns with it as well as being overall correct for our region, and if the money's spent. And I hate to see something that's so heavily subsidized. It does interfere now with the private sector because they cannot compete because of the heavy subsidizing. And so that's my concern. Because the private sector, there is some opportunity for them, but not if we're literally having free transportation, which is close to what we're doing. I mean, RABA doesn't, just on the fare box ratio, we don't take into consideration capital expenditures on that. So, I don't even know what the fare box ratio really is, and no one can tell me.
Mr. Auckland?
Chuck, can you tell me?
Well, you're absolutely right in that, currently our fare box ratio is somewhere in the 10% range, and that is just operating. So that doesn't include capital. So if you included capital on that, it would be much, much lower. And so you're correct in that sense. The federal money he's talking about, that is allocated money that comes to the region to be used for transit. And if we didn't use that federal money, we would have to use our own, you mentioned the transportation development dollars to pay for that service. And that federal money also comes with a match, 50% on operating, only 20% on capital. So we use as much of the federal dollars as we can and use as little as the TDA dollars so that we can make sure we can use as much of that on our streets and roads projects as we can.
Thank you.
So it's a case that we use it or lose it.
Yes, ma'am.
Pretty much.
And the RABA's already made a decision about that.
Yeah, it's good for 3 years. If you don't use it 3 years, you lose that allocation.
Right, and RABA voted on this on Monday.
We voted on the state of good repair, the next one.
Next, yeah.
That was then our budget issue.
Okay.
I think it's important to clarify, the sentiment is to never let the people who need public transportation to go without a ride. Let me just be extremely clear. I don't want to not provide rides for those who need it. I do believe with everything in me that we could do it much better, much more efficient for much less, and then capitalize that savings to fix our roads, however that works out. I don't know. But I just do believe that we could do it better. But what I'm sense has been, I'm going to offend and I'll apologize right now. I don't think we've been willing to look at a different way of doing business. And we've just been going down the same road, doing the same way because the state says to do it this way. And I think it'll take courage. It'll take forward thinking. It'll take way outside the box. But I just do believe that there's a way to do public transportation in a rural place. I know we've got a box picture in here and this is the metropolitan urban area. I struggle with urban and Shasta County. We're pretty darn rural. Everybody drives everywhere most of the time. And I just need the public to be clear. I'm not trying to cut jobs from Transdev. I'm not trying to cut rides from people who need it. But I think that there's a lot of other players in this space and we need to do it better for less and save the taxpayers some dollars. So thank you.
So you'd like them to keep riding with diesel and not work on expensive buses?
I think, well, we're pretty clear that the electric bus that we bought for double the money is junk. And as we heard, there's other jurisdictions now decommissioning them way early in the game. So that's probably not a viable option. I know what the state mandates in zero emission. I think that's a ridiculous mandate, but I'll leave that for later. So yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see what the public does with mandates from Sacramento. We've been going along with mandates, but is the public going to go along with that with no fossil fuel cars by 2035s and starting right away? I think there's going to be a huge backlash, and we'll just see where it goes, because we don't want to be on that highway to nowhere.
Yeah, and those are great conversations that we can continue to have as we develop short-range transit plans, long-range transit plans, other regional planning efforts through the RTP and everything. On this one, we're just trying to get our federal funds in that system so we can get those allocated, all those projects where most of that's out of our control in terms of we're asking the cities and the county and Rabbit to say, hey, where do you want to put those funds? Here's your allocation that we know of. What are we going to do? And we'll address those through other planning efforts.
Thank you, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
We have the motion.
Is there a motion?
Yes.
I will make them, I thought.
It's already made.
It's made in
Chair
second.
Mazzano, can you repeat- Excuse me, Chair Mazzano, can you repeat the first and second of motion of who that was?
I made the motion.
It was Susan Schrader that made the motion and
I bet.
Member Rickard made the second.
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. And we can go down the line for roll call vote. We can start with Acting Chair Mazzano,
Yes.
Board Member Commenti,
Yes.
Board Member Rickard,
Yes.
Board Member Jones,
Yes.
Board Member Gallagher,
Yes.
Board Member Schrader,
Yes.
and Board Member Watkins.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Motion carries unanimous. Item number 9. Kimmy.
Hello. So this fiscal year, the California State Controller's Office allocated State of Good Repair funds to SRTA. State of Good Repair funds are specifically for transit capital projects, transit rehab, transit maintenance. The amount for fiscal year 22/23 was $278,758. With the call for projects, staff recommends that the Board of Directors approve 4 projects. One project is providing 20% match in the amount of $29,025 for a RAVA van replacement for paratransit services if RAVA is awarded FTA, Federal Transit Administration 5339 funds. The second project is to provide 10% match in the amount of $128,325 for a RAVA zero emission bus replacement and add a new charger. The third project is for the amount of $37,700 for a Consolidated Transportation Services Agency vehicle wash machine. The fourth project that is recommended is $83,708 for a regional zero emission infrastructure project. These 4 projects are recommended for a total of the $278,758 full allocation. There are also other projects but are not being recommended. It is for a zero emission bus replacement and add a new charger for fiscal year 24/25 and a bus replacement. Again, these last 2 projects are not recommended at this time, but can be explored in future State of Good Repair cycles. So staff recommends that these 4 projects be adopted for state of good repair funds in the total amount of $278,754.
Public comment.
I'll open it for public comment. Is there any?
There is not.
Done.
Closed. Break it. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move that we approve
I do have one.
item number 9.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mark.
Okay.
Sure.
I did ask.
You did, and I stuttered there for just a second. The second item, the zero emission bus replacement and add a new charger. Is this going to be the same bus that same manufacturer?
I will hand that over to Rabbit to respond.
Do we know yet?
It's a bus that we've got to replace by, I think, 2026, but we're not a bit to get these. It would not be the Proterra.
Okay.
We're replacing it with one of the diesels, would be one of our, I guess, a second one if we depend on whether we go hydrogen or electric. We don't know that yet and haven't picked a bidder yet. So this would be planning for.
Allocate those funds so we have it. Okay.
And the other 10% match would come from what.
So Chuck, if you go to the hydrogen one, does it have to be fueled by green hydrogen or not?
I don't know that for certain right now. Yeah, I'm not as familiar with the technology, so we're just beginning to look at planning that. There's a study that we're looking at right now to look at how we want to replace our, whether it's hydrogen or electric or whatever the other technology is, don't know yet. And so we're looking at those, we're looking at the costs, we're looking at our revenues, trying to figure out what's the region. Mr. Gallagher talked about the Proterra right now is not a great vehicle. It's well.
I think maybe what we should be doing is getting all our buses with trailer hitches, so if we have to pull a generator behind them, we could do that.
All right.
Okay, there's a plan. Okay, we have a motion and a second, do we not?
Yes, we do.
We do.
We have a motion and a second. We need a roll call vote, please.
The motion was made by Rickard and second was Schrader.
Yes.
Okay. Board Member Commenti,
Yes.
Board Member Rickard,
Yes.
Board Member Jones,
Yes, I said it. I
I'm
said
sorry.
it as quietly as I could, though.
Still goes on the record, no matter what.
Yeah.
Board Member Gallagher,
Yes.
Member Gallagher, yes. Acting Chair Mazzano,
Yes.
Board Member Schrader,
Yes.
Board Member Watkins.
I'm gonna vote yes, but you realize you're calling me last every time?
Oh, no. That's because it's too W.
Last shall be first, Greg, you know.
Mix it up a little bit. People know. I either have to announce first how I'm going to vote because nobody knows because I'm always called last.
On that note, I believe we can adjourn.
Yeah, let's make it.
Now I did it.
Get official.
Kimmy, thank you.